We have a fantastic new panel. It's Church, State, and the Safety Net, a new reckoning for faith-based services. In the United States of America right now, billionaires will be getting permanent tax cuts, but Medicaid will be cut by $1 trillion. Argentina gets a $40 billion bailout, but this administration apparently doesn't have money for USAID or children's cancer research. But who needs money or a social safety net when you can just buy crypto and a meme coin, bro? Too soon? Our afternoon begins with a look at the role of faith-based organizations in America's social safety net, or lack thereof, and how that role is being tested today. It is moderated by the Hall of Famer, you know her, you love her, Adelle Banks. Give some love. And she will lead the discussion. The panel we're going to have, you got to give them all a big round of applause. I'm going to do it quick. Stanley Carlson-Thies, Mark Hetfield, and the Reverend Eugene Cho. Come up to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I can't see the clock. Oh, just barely.
Which one?
Welcome to our panelists. Can you hear me? Thank you. Yes? You can hear me all right? Okay. Welcome again to our panel on Church, State, and the Safety Net, a new reckoning for faith-based services. Happy to have Stanley Carlson-Thies, left to right, and Mark Hetfield and Reverend Eugene Cho all here with us today. I want us to first take a breath and take a step back. And I want to ask Stanley, who is the Senior Fellow at the Center for Public Justice and founder of the Institutional Religious Freedom Alliance, which advocates for freedom of faith-based organizations, to give us a brief history, catch us up on how the particular work of faith-based partnerships with the White House started with the Bush administration some 25 years ago and moved on from there.
Yeah, just a few comments. So we're talking about government funds and faith-based organizations. When I worked for the George W. Bush White House Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives, all the time we had groups who came to us to ask us if we would allocate them some of that money we controlled. And we had to keep saying we don't control any money. Our job is to be here and make sure that the federal government, when it does allocate money, gives a fair shake to faith organizations. That was a kind of the faith-based initiative, wasn't giving money to your friends. For about 3 decades, there has been this effort underway, it's a little bit more than 25 years, to make sure that when the federal government decides which organizations get money for social services, that religious organizations are not cut out of that. And that's continued through to Trump's second administration. But he's brought a tsunami to bear on that whole partnerships system, and that's what we'll talk about, is that tsunami. So all these groups can take part, but that system is under huge strain. Well, a church like this has been a partner with government for centuries and many other religious organizations, but I think you have to say that as the social service, welfare services of the United States were built up in the 20th century, through the 20th century, increasingly faith organizations that were explicitly faith were kind of marginalized. The government wasn't supposed to give money to them. If they did take part, they were called religiously affiliated, right, kind of arm's length. And by the 90s, a lot of people said that's not quite right. That's not a good interpretation of the First Amendment. We have all these services that could be better. We know good faith organizations that could bring many gifts to the partnership if they could have a shot. And out of that mixture of motives and so on, in 1996 came language called charitable choice, part of federal welfare reform, to create a level playing field, as they called it, for faith organizations. So that was 96 under the Clinton administration. When Bush became president, he said, great, how do we administer that? And he created a White House Faith Office and agency centers, and these agencies that actually give out the money to kind of make sure that there was a fair treatment of faith organizations. And then also to think about other aspects of the grant process, or it's too complex. Other ways to redesign programs is a way to utilize the gifts of faith organizations, their local trust, and so on. Like, for example, the Access to Recovery program, that for a while we had drug treatment funding that went, the money, the authorization went to the person who had the difficulty. They could pick the kind of treatment they thought was best for them. So that was kind of an interesting combination of faith organizations and the government. So all of that happened during those years, and Bush did it, and then President Obama carried this forward, and then President Trump 1 carried it forward, Biden carried it forward. Trump's second administration has said, let's do this, and actually had a very excellent executive order talking about very good principles of continuing to clear the way for faith organizations along with secular ones. And then from the side has come this tsunami, explosion, disruption, whatever you want to call it, to the whole partnership system itself. It's not per se anti-faith, but it means anybody that wants to connect up with the government is now under huge strain about whether there will be money, which agency will they be working with, will the money be withdrawn after they received it, new conditions and all of that, and that's what we're going to talk about.
Thank you. So, Mark, I'm wondering if you can speak a bit about that as far as how the landscape has changed in the time you've led HIAS. How long have you done that, and what has been your perspective of its change over that time, if there's a way to say that relatively briefly?
Well, you know, my history goes back even further than what Stanley just was talking about. HIAS was established 122 years ago here in New York City. Our original headquarters was what is now the Joseph Papp Public Theater on Lafayette Street. That was also the shelter for refugees, so I can't go over that entire history. But what I will say is that HIAS was established as an organization that helped refugees because they were Jewish, and that today we're an organization that helps refugees because we are Jewish. And since 1980, we have done that in very close partnership with the United States government. But as Stanley said, that has changed drastically. Just since January 20th, we have lost at HIAS half of all of our revenue. In a day, on January 24th, we received stop work orders that literally cut down half of our programs with no notice, no consultation. It was a Friday afternoon. We were told, effective 5 p.m. today, you are to do no more work with us and you'll receive no more pay. We sued over that. We were made somewhat whole for the work that we had done. We're suing over another issue, which is refugee resettlement. The administration had stopped all refugee resettlement to the United States on January 20th, 4 days earlier than the stop work orders. We sued on that as well. But to make a long story short about those two lawsuits, we're no longer really partners with the U.S. government, right? And we will not be for the foreseeable future, with one exception I'll talk briefly about. I'd say the landscape has really changed in three major ways that I'll quickly try to highlight. One is these partnerships themselves, right? We were one of the original faith-based partnerships. It was HIAS and 9 other resettlement agencies, 7 of whom were faith-based. And that number really kind of became 8 because the International Rescue Committee took on Islamic Relief USA and made them a partner in refugee resettlement as well. So we were 8 faith-based agencies out of 10 working to resettle refugees in the United States in partnership with the State Department. That's changing right now. The administration has let us know that they are moving toward partnership with states and away from partnership with resettlement agencies. So that is being transitioned right now. We're waiting for news on that, but the administration has failed to meet the statutory deadlines on the refugee resettlement program. Every year they are required, the president's required to consult with Congress, to issue a report to Congress on refugee resettlement for the next year, and then to issue a presidential determination on how many refugees may come here for the next fiscal year. That all has to be done by October 1st. That was not done this year, so we have no answers to any of the questions about what the program will look like next year. They blame the government shutdown, but last time I checked, the government was still operating on September 30th, so they missed every deadline that had been set in statute for 45 years. So we're waiting for the government to reopen for them to reveal this to us, though there has been some good reporting on it. The second thing they've changed is refugees who are coming into this country. The U.S. refugee definition has mirrored that of the of the UN definition, which is a person with a well-founded fear of persecution who cannot return to their country of origin because of persecution on the basis of race, religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion. They must be outside of their country of origin to be a refugee. The Trump administration has found basically a loophole in the Refugee Act to bring in instead Afrikaners, white Afrikaners from South Africa, and they are bringing in these Afrikaners who are not displaced from Africa, bringing them in as refugees, notwithstanding that there are 128,000 refugees with approval notices from Homeland Security who are much more diverse, who are not being allowed to come in. So that has never happened before. The third thing that we're seeing is that this administration has deprioritized religious minorities in the refugee program. That surprised us. We thought religious minorities would be allowed to continue to come in to the United States as refugees. HIAS administers the program for Iranian religious minorities, Jews, Christians, Baha'is, Zoroastrians, Mandaeans from Iran, to come to the United States to join communities here and find religious freedom here. That program was totally stopped by the Trump administration on January 20th, as well as every other refugee program that dealt with giving shelter, giving asylum to people who had claims based on religious persecution. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Eugene, I wonder what you could speak about as far as things have changed. And tell us, too, how long you've been at Bread for the World and what you've seen, including, if you will, the changes related to USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, which has been dismantled by the current administration.
Wow, that was a lot. Thank you. But man, that was a lot. And we continue to stand with others who are doing this work. So my name again is Eugene Cho, and I serve as the president of Bread for the World. I've been in this role for about 5.5 very long years. Bread for the World, in case you're not familiar with it, you can check us out at bread.org, was actually started here in Lower East Side, New York. It was started in the basement of a church called Trinity Lutheran Church by a pastor by the name of Reverend Art Simon. Reverend Art Simon began to wrestle with the fact that there were people in his church that were struggling with issues of hunger and food insecurity, like any good pastor or shepherd. They started a church pantry, but realized that these issues continued to persist. When he began to speak with other faith leaders in the area, they also had similar issues as well. And so eventually, I believe 7 Protestant leaders and 7 Catholic leaders got together and helped start Bread for the World. One of the reasons why I think he understood the connection between issues of hunger and policies is that his brother happened to be a U.S. Senator by the name of Paul Simon. Some of you who go ways back, you might know or remember the bow tie. And so Bread for the World, we've been doing this work for the last 50 years, focused on both domestic issues of hunger and international issues of hunger. Again, our mission is to help end hunger both here in the U.S. and around the world. Sadly, this is probably the most challenging time, certainly related to international hunger. Domestic hunger, we can go off on a riff here as well, but I'll speak a little bit about domestic and then we'll speak about international. The government is shut down, and so as a result, there has been a lot of news and conversations about SNAP benefits expiring in about 7-8 days, WIC as well. I was just doing an interview with Fox, with USA Today, knowing that hunger is not a partisan issue. I believe it's political, but it impacts people of all stripes, of all states, urban, rural, and what have you. And also the fact that in this country, where we boast ourselves as the greatest nation in the world, that there are still 14 million children here in the United States that experience food insecurity, 42 million people on SNAP, 7 million people on WIC. International, I'm not quite sure where to start, but Mark shared earlier about the executive orders where without even a warning, I think it's the chaotic, cruel nature of how it was conducted. Because I think whether or not, whatever your political inclination may be, I think most people would agree that every administration has the right to align programs and policies in a way that more reflect their goals and their policies. I think it would have been hard, but certainly much more reasonable to say, hey, we want to give you a year runway, that these changes are coming, but unfortunately that warning did not take place. And as a result, when we say programs were shut down, people were laid off, we can now look back and say that without any hesitation, despite individuals in the administration saying that no one has died as a result of these cuts, we can now say, depending on various sources, up to 400,000 people have died as a result of these cuts. The Lancet report came out with I think a pretty robust, credible research saying that by the year 2030, if nothing were to change from the shutdown of USAID, they're estimating about 14 million people will lose their lives as a result of these shutdown programs. It also includes approximately 4.7 million children around the world. I'll just share a couple more stories. One of the things that Bread's been advocating for, obviously, is fighting back against some of the rescissions that have been debated over the last few months. And one of the things that Bread and our coalition partners were able to salvage was the protection of a program called PEPFAR. PEPFAR is one that we should all be familiar with. The faith alliances and religious institutions had a lot to do in helping pass PEPFAR, helping save 25+ million lives. And we were somewhat grateful in saying that we're glad that amid all the rescission cuts and all the demise and disintegration of USAID, at least PEPFAR was saved. The unfortunate thing is that they're realizing that because every single staff person nearly was sent home, laid off, that even if PEPFAR, because it was, again, salvaged, that there's actually no infrastructure on the ground to be able to implement these programs. And of course, lives have been lost. Now, we have been assured that international aid is going to be reconstructed in different forms. Unfortunately, I don't feel like these conversations are happening at the pace that they've said it will or the manner it deserves. Because again, as people of faith, regardless of what our political inclination or faith lens might be, because for me as an evangelical Christian, and I know that's a weird phrase to say in today's world, but I was a local church pastor for 30 years. I'm ordained through a denomination called the Evangelical Covenant Church, and while I wrestle with that descriptive evangelical, I still consider myself an evangelical Christian, and much of my conviction around international aid and hunger, not just theologically, but in many ways have been shaped through my experience as an evangelical Christian. And so it has been incredibly demoralizing, very challenging to see what has ensued in this past 8 or 9 months. I'm sure there's more that can be said, but I'll stop here for now. And eventually I will say that there are rays of hope, and hopefully we'll get to speak to that a little bit later as well.
We can hope we can get to that as well. And thank you all for sharing what you have so far. It is a very challenging time, and I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit more about some of the legal and moral implications of all of this. So, Mark, you mentioned having half of the revenue that you previously had, and I'm wondering about just where you go from now, where you go from here. One, whether there's anything more you'd add about the legal implications and the work that you're doing in that realm. And also, there are reports that the Trump administration is expected to greatly reduce the admissions in the coming year with a possible ceiling of some 7,500 instead of 125,000, I believe, set by Biden's administration. So just, I'm wondering about the future cooperation you see, especially since you mentioned that you're kind of following the line of the Catholic bishops and the Episcopal Church and not having as much of a contract and contact with the federal government.
Sure. There are, I want to talk about two struggles that we're having as a faith-based agency working in this space, and in particular as a Jewish agency. One is with the U.S. Refugee Program. As you mentioned, not only are there there are 128,000 refugees that thought they had been approved to come to the U.S., that have pieces of paper saying they were approved. And they're not just being told to get to the back of the bus, they're told to get off the bus, right? The administration is pushing them off the bus and then putting white Afrikaners on in their place. We're, to say the least, asking ourselves if we can participate in a program where that's happening. And the answer right now, we don't know what the administration really has in store for us for next year. And to us, like if we, in Judaism, we have an expression: to save one life is to save the world. And if we're going to help one refugee family, one legitimate refugee family through this program, maybe it's worth doing, right? It's worth doing. But we have to look at whether or not we can continue and whether or not it's right for us to be doing this work. So that's a struggle that we're having, as are the other 9 agencies that are, and in fact, you may know that 2 have already left. Surprisingly, the first to leave was the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. We thought they would be the last, but they left on January 25th and said they were doing so because they could no longer make the program work financially with what the U.S. government had just done to us that week. And then the second were the Episcopalians. The Episcopal Migration Ministries left the program in May. Presiding Bishop Sean Rowe wrote a letter saying that, yes, there were financial reasons for this, but in addition, the straw that broke the camel's back was that they could not, in good conscience, put white people to the front of the line when there were so many people of color who had followed all the rules and had waited with their lives at risk for years to go through the refugee process, and in particular with regard to their being in community with the Anglican Church of Southern Africa. And so these reasons were cited publicly by the presiding bishop for leaving the refugee program. So there's 8 of us left, and now we have to wrestle with what's next, and that's a big moral dilemma. The second one, you may know many communities of faith, and particularly Jewish communities, but definitely not just us, are heavily reliant on the nonprofit security grant program, right, which provides significant grants to provide security for synagogues. And you're going to hear in the next session, we're fortunate to hear from Rabbi Myers from the Tree of Life congregation, which was one of 3 congregations that was attacked by a gunman who killed 11 Jews praying 7 years ago this month. And HIAS, unfortunately, the last thing that the murderer tweeted before he went into the synagogue was, "HIAS is bringing invaders to kill my people, screw the optics, I'm going in." And then he went in and murdered 11 people. We're all very dependent on these security grants to try to make our places of worship safe to the extent that we can do that. And this year, for the first time, there's a requirement when you apply where you have to actually state whether or not you work with aliens, whether or not the applying institution works with what they call aliens, and whether or not that relates to the grant that's being applied for. You also have to state whether or not you intend to use any of the money that would be provided by the federal government to provide any support to aliens. And again, it's using the word aliens, which doesn't mean undocumented immigrants or illegal aliens, as they say. It means people who are not U.S. citizens, right? But so that needs to be disclosed in the application. And the other thing that needs to be disclosed is whether or not the recipient engages in any DEI practices. And so again, it doesn't say why they're asking for this information. It doesn't say they're going to disqualify you based on this information, but it doesn't say they won't disqualify you either. So it's really scary, and so the Jewish community in particular is really wrestling with this. HIAS, of course, that's what we do. We work with aliens. That is our mission, and we do it in partnership with congregations and Jewish family service agencies around the country. And obviously, we're proud of it, and we will never stop doing it. But for them, it's their primary mission. It's part of their faith to welcome the stranger. It's reiterated 36 times in the Torah, but it's not necessarily the core thing that they do. And so congregations are really struggling. You'll see there is a letter or guidance to congregations issued jointly by the Reform movement and the Conservative movement, trying to give them encouragement to apply for these grants and assurances that as a community we will stand up for freedom of religion and making sure that's not infringed upon in spite of these chilling questions that are being asked in association with these grant applications. So those are two of our struggles.
Thank you very much. A footnote is that my colleague Jack Jenkins at RNS has written about this, the nonprofit security grant program situation that Mark just described, so hopefully you can take a look at that if you haven't seen it yet. So we have a limited amount of time before we go to Q&A. So Eugene, I'd like to ask you whether Bread for the World has had to deal with legal complaints in any way, or instead how you would synthesize what the moral objections are to the way things are, the way you have described them for faith-based organizations.
Yeah, let me see if I can try to distill this quickly. So we're not in any legal proceedings with the government. We don't receive any funding from the government as well. It's one of the reasons why, from the jump, I think Bread was able to be much more vocal in conveying our deep concerns about the manner in which these executive orders took place. I say this not to criticize my colleagues that are implementing NGOs. This is uncharted territories in many ways. But one of the reasons why I think we have some sort of a moral high ground when we engage members of Congress and the administration is that we are never advocating for ourselves. Bread for the World, because we're undergirded by the support of about 60,000 members who give monthly, churches and foundations who support our work, particularly to try to mobilize and organize the wider Christian tent, if you will, that we're advocating for the moral issue that every single human being is sacred, matters to God. Whether they're born in Sudan, in Gaza, in other parts of the world. And I think for that reason, and because Bread has tried to carefully navigate this posture of being a nonpartisan organization working in bipartisan ways. And so as a result, we've been able to have meetings with the administration. We've been able to have meetings with members of Congress talking about these very things. But the one thing that I think has concerned me tremendously early on and even now is the grandiose nature of the fraud, waste, and abuse. That has been incredibly problematic. And I can tell you right now, no one that does this work ever says that the work that we do in global development or USAID is perfect. No one has ever said that. We know that when you do this work, it is fraught with nuance and complexities and challenges. But we saw what transpired early on where they took a few examples of mis or disinformation and gave this narrative that this is the totality or the majority of what took place and justified dismantling USAID and basically stopping $43 billion of impact that was making a tremendous impact around the world. And so it's really important that while it's not necessarily my aim to argue about these semantics, but we don't want to let that go. We want to say that when these programs, not just by USAID or just by U.S. leadership, but this would not have been possible without U.S. leadership, that 90 million lives have been saved in the last 20 years. 90 million lives. As a U.S. citizen, as a Christian, as a human being, that's something that we should all celebrate. A couple of weeks ago, the Gates Foundation had an event here in New York, and one of the things that they also tout collectively with many who do this work is that child mortality has been halved since 1990. This is incredible progress. But unfortunately, we've allowed certain voices to dominate these narratives to suggest that the totality of USAID and international work was fraud, waste, and abuse. And I think we've got to continue to convey that that wasn't true and that there's really, really important work. I just flew in here from Iowa. And you might be wondering why Iowa. Iowa is the host of an event called the World Food Prize, where lots of conversations around food insecurity, agriculture comes together. And it was sobering, but also a reminder of the incredible work that continues to take place, particularly among local indigenous leaders all around the world. And I want to make sure that I highlight that as well.
Thank you. We do need to move to Q&A, but I want to give Stanley one more opportunity to just look forward for us as far as where we go from here. We did mention wanting to have some word of hope, if you might have that, related to the new ways under what you called the tsunami. Yeah. Faith-based organizations are still continuing to help people.
Well, I just want to say, as a Christian, that's where my hope is, and trust less in princes and government systems. But I think it's very difficult for an organization to have a partnership when there's a sea of uncertainty. And that's kind of what everybody's facing at the moment. I do want to say that a lot of this is happening in federal programs and overseas programs and national programs. And a lot of that federal money actually still goes out to state and local governments, and there's still a lot of good partnerships with faith and community groups happening. So a lot of what we read about is kind of at another level, but that doesn't excuse what's happening at this other level. And it's for an administration that is working hard on the one side, talking a lot about opening the door to faith and community groups, and on the other side, making it impossible for them to have partnerships. I think that's just really problematic. People of faith, as you've heard, don't stop working because these things happen. But I think a lot of them are having to readjust and say, is this a project we can get involved in, or do we have to say there are other ways we'll continue to serve? And there's some great things can only happen when you work with the government, and so it's tragic if a lot of those relationships crumble.
Thank you all. Time for you all to ask your questions of this panel. Any hands? Come now.
Bueller.
Hey guys, thanks for coming. We'll see you guys next week. I'll be honest with you. The first 6 months of this year has been some of the most challenging years, not just from a professional work perspective, but I think morally, theologically. As a person of faith, as a Christian, I have been struggling with the co-opting, the hijacking of Jesus to justify certain things. It has been very, very hard. But there are some rays of hope, and I'll just share maybe 3 things really quickly. One is I'm grateful that meetings are taking place. For a while, when the executive orders were taking place, we were just getting limited responses. But the fact that we're now having meetings with certain layers, and right now currently lower levels of the administration, but also members of Congress directly, has been encouraging. And we're grateful that people are saying the right things in closed meetings, and we're asking them to have the moral courage to say these things outside these private meetings as well. And slowly but surely that's taking place. The second thing that really gives me hope is the fact that when this thing called the PBR was released, the PBR stands for the President's Budget Request. It basically nixed out numerous international programs that have been tried and true programs that have made tremendous impact. The McGovern-Dole feeding program, Feed the Future, and what have you. We're very encouraged that as Congress has been convening, I know it's a shutdown, but as they're discussing 2026 appropriations, they have refunded these programs. And that's very, very encouraging, including funding a global nutrition account that Bread for the World prioritizes, because we really believe that you can't just talk about food insecurity, you have to also elevate nutrition as well. And that not only was funded, it actually has increased from last year. And the third thing that I would say is I am encouraged that there are more and more Christians, including people of, quote unquote, the conservative bent, that are saying this is not what we voted for. because we hear that phrase often, this is what people voted for, and I'm hearing more and more Christians say, this is not what we voted for as a conservative evangelical Christian. And Bread for the World is trying to continue to mobilize the wider church, but especially those who I think may have more opportunity to be heard in this particular administration, and that gives me hope as well.
Yeah, I'd also say three things. For HIAS, as a faith-based refugee agency, history is on our side, the facts are on our side, and the Jewish community is on our side. And those three things give me hope. History is on our side because we were working independently of the government for most of our first century until 1980, and the government at that time was facing a massive number of refugee crises, which is why the Refugee Act of 1980, hard to imagine, passed the Senate unanimously and passed the House almost unanimously, creating this public-private partnership that we have today. But in any event, for almost 100 years, we did it without the government. We'll do it again without the government. The second thing is the facts are on our side. You know, you can say, you can badmouth refugees, as the Trump administration has done over and over again, even though these are legal immigrants who came in to the country thoroughly vetted, saying they're a drain on our resources. But the fact of the matter is, in 2017, President Trump tried to do that once before. He commissioned a study to demonstrate how much refugees cost the American taxpayer. And that study really kind of boomeranged on him, because it found that when you look at both sides of the ledger, over a 10-year period, refugees and asylees contribute $63 billion more in state, local, and federal taxes than they take in services and assistance. $63 billion. And the Biden administration then, he didn't finish the study. He stopped it in its tracks, but it was leaked and posted by the New York Times, so you can see it for yourselves. But then the Biden administration redid the study, looked at a 15-year period, and found that actually over 15 years, refugees and asylees contribute $124 billion more in taxes than they take in services and assistance. So refugees are a good investment, and that's on our side. And also, when I first became executive director of HIAS 13 years ago, my biggest problem was apathy. It's not a problem anymore in the Jewish community. Much of the Jewish community stands solidly with us and our work and with refugees. And under the Biden administration, refugee resettlement, because it had already collapsed under the first Trump administration and had to be revived to address the Afghan evacuation after the collapse of Kabul, we democratized it and opened up refugee resettlement to private sponsor groups and congregations across the country, not just within the Jewish community, but across all communities. And so we now have congregations and individuals who are acting out of faith more engaged than they have been in many, many decades.
I'll just add one item of hope. So besides behind-the-scenes talks with Congress, some of these are also going on with the administration, including faith offices that are there to kind of shepherd these partnerships. So what's going to come out of that, we don't know. We're people of hope and work and prayer. Yeah.
Adele, can I cheat and ask a question?
If no one else has a question.
If no one else has a question.
I was going to ask a question, but you go ahead.
No, you first.
No, does anyone know? Okay. Okay. Oh, okay.
There's
We do
one.
know. See, we shamed everyone into asking questions.
Hi, Mark kind of addressed this already, but I used to work for Catholic Relief Services and Lutheran World Relief, and seeing both of those agencies be dismantled has just been heartbreaking. Do you think going forward that faith-based agencies are going to have to go it alone, or are they hoping that this kind of funding is going to be restored? Are they coming to a point where they're just going to have to rely on the religious community to do this kind of work, both here and overseas?
To me, I would sum that up by saying, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. The full faith and credit of the United States government as a partner has completely evaporated and will never be restored, at least not for a long, long time. So we will think twice. I mean, and so will every other organization before partnering with the U.S. government and putting our full faith and credit in that partnership, as we have always done. Like when you read the grant agreements that we had with the government, we and all other agencies that worked with them, they were very poorly negotiated by us because we never thought the government, in all our scenario planning, we never thought the government would literally rip up partnership agreements, binding agreements, but just because they could, with no warning, no discussion, no consultation. But that's exactly what they did on January 24th. And likewise, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is also reeling because they've had this happen to them twice as well, where they had tens of thousands of refugees that the U.S. government demanded they refer to the U.S. for resettlement, and then all of a sudden, these refugees were not only not in a better position, but were in a worse position because they were now in limbo with their expectations raised, no place to go, and their dangerous situation unresolved. So, well, that relationship will have to be built back, but it will never be what it was on January 19th.
Yeah, I think I resonate with some of that. So much trust has been broken that it's very understandable for organizations to say, we have moved on. Simultaneously, there are organizations that are waiting to still hear about what this reconstruction of international global programs will look like. And we know that that's going to happen, but I think there's going to be two challenges. One is that it's not going to be restored to the levels that it was during this time. It's not going to happen anytime soon. But the second thing that I think is really problematic is I think we have underestimated the disconnection with the American people. It has been shocking. Earlier, I said that, yes, you have more and more people speaking up, but on the flip side, I've also heard people speak so negatively about America's investment on international aid. And that is very concerning, including people of faith. There is an incredible growth of scarcity mindset. This America first, perhaps, is America only cloaked in some ways or the other. And we should be very alert about that. And again, as people of faith, for me, I'm not just looking to the government for solutions. I'm really looking at our pastors and theologians to say, where may have we failed in our discipleship to somehow see that mercy and justice and empathy and kindness and compassion stops at our borders. That would be one. The last thing that I'll just share is, part of the reason why this is such a personal story and personal matter for me is my father was born in a village outside of a city called Pyongyang. That was, again, back then it was just one country. So he fled down south because of persecution, was an IDP before the acronyms IDP ever came into nomenclature. Internally displaced people experience hunger in ways that are just so hard to fathom. And one of the reasons why he still weeps when he speaks about his love for America, even during these times, as a 90-year-old to be in a couple of months, he still weeps when he talks about America, is that he encountered Americans on Korean soil who represented an ideal of what he would say, greatness. And that's one of the reasons why I think I do the work that I do, is because there is that imagination of what does it mean to advocate and to come alongside the most vulnerable around our world, and yes, even in our own backyards.
Yeah, and just to add briefly, I want to just emphasize again, at the state and local level, a lot of federal money goes, and that system has not been disrupted in the same way, and I think there'll still be a lot of judicious partnerships. I think there's a huge amount of suspicion now, of course, particularly smaller organizations. If even the Catholic bishops have to say we're going to pull out, what's that mean for you if you don't have 50 lawyers and 1,000 specialists to help you out? But, there are some things that government does that you can't do as a private organization. Foster care would be, just to take one example, programs with public schools and partnership with public schools. And I think there are faith organizations that are going to say, this is risky, it's more risky than it used to be, but this is the only way we can carry this out, and so we're going to do that. But I think any idea that anybody had that it's kind of like free money or it's unproblematic or just because it's written on paper, I think all that's kind of gone away now.
Yeah, like HIAS can't resettle refugees without the U.S. government, right? It's not just about the funding.
Yeah.
Like, they also give us the refugees. They make the decisions about who comes in as a refugee, and then they also provide some funding in addition to the funding we have to raise to carry that out. And so that partnership is dissipated.
Please let us thank these three speakers for the sobering message.